Hi folks, welcome to Just Roots Kitchen Intuition online cooking workshop. Today we're going to be doing a marinated herby seared tofu dish that's totally vegetarian. And we're also making a kale and broccolini or broccoli, whichever you have, salad that has a creamy tahini dressing. So this is a really filling meal with so many vegetables in it. And we've got lots to do, so we'll get started. I'll go through some of the ingredients that we will be using today and some alternatives you can use if you don't have them, and some of the materials and supplies to make this recipe easy. So we will start off with some kale, of course, for the kale salad. I have Toscano, I have curly kale, red Russian works too. This is more than you need, but you really just need about a bunch or 5 cups worth once we remove the stems and sort of press it into a cup, if that's a more helpful measurement. You can also just make extra dressing, make a smaller salad if you're just cooking for one. It's up to you. Broccoli or broccolini, we're going to use about like 1 medium-sized broccoli head, or in my case, I just have a bunch of broccolini, so we'll look a little bit more into what we'll be using there. And we're really concentrating on the tops, and the tops only because it's going to be used raw in the salad. You can use the stems to flavor vegetable broth or use them in a stir fry or something else like that. All right, next up, we have some lemons. You can use fresh squeeze is always my recommendation, but if you don't have that, you can use whatever lemon juice that is pre-squeezed that you might have. The recipe calls for shallot or onion, so I'm just going to be using these little nice red onions. Shallots are nice because they're mild, but we're going to be letting these soak in vinegar to remove some of the like pungent, astringent flavors. So it's okay if you want to use onion for that. I've got a block of extra firm tofu. I always suggest using extra firm when we're cooking or frying. It's kind of my favorite. And we will talk a little bit more about some tricks for using fresh tofu. Then we have quinoa. I'm going to make a whole cup of quinoa, but that will leave you plenty extra. You really only need about 1/3 cup for the salad. And I do suggest making extra so you can make a tabbouleh with some of your leftover parsley, or I don't know, some kind of nice salad as a leftover. We have pepita seeds and dried raisins or cranberries. You can use dried cherries. You could use any nut that you really like, any nut or seed for this. And also, if you have time, you're welcome to toast the pepitas. You can find videos of us toasting pepitas on our channel here. I also have some garlic, which I already started peeling to get ahead. I'm using about a 1/2 cup of tahini that I have measured out here for our salad dressing. And then the herbs are up to you. You can use scallions, you can use fennel fronds, you can use dill. I'm going to try to use a 1/2 cup of herbs altogether. So maybe a 1/4 cup of parsley, a 1/4 cup of cilantro. If you like dill, you can do dill. You can use fresh oregano, but only a little bit because it's so pungent. But this is a really herby dish. So it kind of reminds me of like a Vietnamese dish where you've got tons of herbs going into the flavor profile. In terms of pantry items, I'm using apple cider vinegar today, white wine, white vinegar, really any sort of more mild flavored vinegar will be great. Honey, maple syrup, or sugar as a little sweetener for the tahini dressing. As I mentioned before, I'm going to use oregano in my herb tofu, but I am using some dried oregano and I'll only use a teaspoon or less. Black pepper and salt, of course, we always have those on hand, and red pepper flakes for some heat if that's interesting to you. Again, you don't have to. In terms of cooking equipment, I'm using a small food processor, which you do not need. You can make a dressing without a food processor. I'm just trying to save time for this video recording today. Liquid measuring cups. We're going to start off with our quinoa, so it's nice to have a liquid measuring cup. A saucepan or pot that does have a lid for cooking the quinoa. a regular pan for searing our tofu, as long as it's big enough to have, all of your tofu in it. And then sort of a strainer, which I'm going to use to rinse my quinoa. And really, I do that to get some of the bitter coating or bitter flavor off of the quinoa. A large bowl for salad, a small bowl for dressing if you'd like. Those are just helpful. More measuring spoons. And I use a lemon squeezer to get the juice out. So let's just get started without further ado. We're going to get going on the quinoa. So I measured out 1 cup of quinoa. Again, you only need about a 1/3 cup of quinoa. So you could use 1 whole cup and use some for leftovers. And unlike rice, I'm just going to toss the quinoa right into my pan, and I'm going to bring it up to a boil with water and a pinch of salt. We don't have to put in the water first and bring it to a boil like with rice. And the ratio that I use for quinoa, you should have it on your package instructions, and you can follow that. I do 1 cup to 1 3/4 cup. And you're going to want to rinse this and then run it through a strainer. Okay, so we're just it doesn't have to be super in depth, but you do want to get a lot of that sort of dust and outer coating off of the quinoa. Really helps. If you don't have a fine mesh strainer like I have, you can always use a piece of cheesecloth. That should work just fine. And go ahead and toss your quinoa back in the bowl. And then measure out 1 3/4 cups. Make sure you get the quinoa off the sides, because they'll burn and stick. You can add a little more salt. And then I'm going to put it on high for now with the cover on so I can get it to a boil. When it comes to a boil, I'll remove the cover, put it on low, and we're going to set a timer for 15 to 20 minutes. We'll be checking on it uncovered. All right, so now that our quinoa is rolling, we're going to go ahead and get started on our kale. So because we're having our kale raw, it makes a lot of sense to remove these thick stems from the kale. And that's just a kind of fun, easy process. You're just stripping the leaves off the stem, like so. You do the same thing with red Russian, curly kale, whatever it may be. And again, I'm going for about 5 cups of this. Okay. And basically what I'm going to do is sort of roll it into what they call like a cigar or a ball, and this is just going to help me chop it really efficiently and quickly. So once you think you've finished off about a full bunch, again, mine was way more than a full bunch, you can stop. Oh, and if you need to wash your kale, I suggest thoroughly drying it beforehand because your dressing can turn out pretty watery if you don't thoroughly dry it. So you can wash it ahead of time, give it time to dry, or, use paper towels, use a salad spinner, whatever you have. So basically, I'm just being careful to not cut my fingers, and I'm sort of just roughly chopping this into ribbons. And I can hear that my quinoa is almost ready to come to a boil. So as soon as I finish my first rough chop, I'll attend to that. And I'm going to go across lengthwise so we don't get any or widthwise so we don't get any super long pieces of kale. It's not quite there. All right, so, when I try to think about what a cup of kale is, I usually just take a fistful of it, and that's about a cup to me, squeezing it down. Perfect. And now it comes in handy to have a nice big bowl. The kale, it looks like so much, but as soon as you apply some dressing, which we're going to do when we massage it, it's really going to come down to quite a bit less. The volume reduces significantly. Now there's options. You can add your dressing to just the kale to make the massaging easier, or you can add your broccolini first, or broccoli. If you have just a regular head of broccoli, what I like to do is sort of just cut the individual broccoli florets off of the stems. You can leave a little bit of the stem, but just think about you want bite-sized pieces or even smaller than that in the salad because it's going to be raw. So you might want to cut those florets in half or in half twice and fourths, depending on how big they are. But I'll give you a size reference based on the broccolini I have. This is bunching broccoli, and it's really similar to crown broccoli in flavor profile and texture. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it. So there's a lot of stem left over here, which you're welcome to use for another dish or stir fry. But I want it to be sort of just in these little bite-sized pieces. And we're looking for about 2 cups of broccoli heads. You can even use your fingers like I did to break it apart once it's removed from the main crown. And so, yeah, go ahead and process your broccoli. I'm just gonna bunch all mine as if it were a crown. Like so, use my knife. Good, a couple of these could use some breaking up. And it's a nice crunchy salad with your seeds, your broccoli, super high in protein, nutrient dense, sort of a great food to get fall greens in you because kale does grow through the fall, broccoli does nice in the fall, these cool season crops. I like to try to get as many greens in my body as I can that are fresh and local before the winter months start. So again, 2 cups of broccoli, about 5 cups of kale, 1 bunch of kale, and 1 medium head of broccoli. You can include the broccoli leaves that might be on the plant. They're all related, broccoli, kale, cauliflower, cabbage. So pretty much every part of it is edible. We eat the stems, leaves, and the flowers. So broccoli is a flower, and same with cauliflower. Kind of a fun one to ask kids if they've ever eaten flowers. They may say no, but hopefully they've tried broccoli or cauliflower. Right, got a little compost over here, so my rabbits are going to get a nice snack. Once you've hit about 2 cups of your florets, you might be finding some boiling is starting to happen or about to. So just keep an eye on that. I do like to stir my quinoa and check on it, but you really ought to not have to. You can kind of walk away from it as long as you put it on a low heat after it comes to a boil. All right. Oh, and also the broccoli, when it does start to flower, here's a great example. Makes these beautiful yellow flowers. They are edible and they taste like broccoli. They're delicious. So if you ever see that at the farmer's market, don't be scared. Totally normal. I like to keep my cutting board a little bit clean. I'm not like a professional chef, but it helps me with chopping. And this, we're just going to set it aside for now. We don't need it. So the next step is to measure out a 1/4 cup of cranberries. You don't have to measure it. You can if you want. For me, that the cranberries make like I can feel it in my palm pretty much, about a fourth cup. And same with these pepitas. So maybe it's a little bit more than that. I did measure these. So you need a fourth cup of each. You can use these raw as they come, or you can use toasted pepitas. And to toast them, it's so easy. Just put some olive oil in a pan, bring it up to medium heat, toss in your pepitas, stir kind of constantly. You can add spices like cumin or curry powder, salt, pepper. Just make sure once they turn a golden brown, you take off the heat and drain them on a paper towel. It really elevates dishes. Do it a lot in our kitchen intuition classes. If you have a kitchen timer, that's helpful. So we'll do 15 to 20 minutes. We'll check it in 15, and then we will cover it and let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes. And that's going to help the quinoa absorb the rest of the water and sort of get more fluffy. Okay, so we can set these once you've measured out your pepitas and cranberries. You can really just toss them in the same bowl. It's all going to the same place. Set it aside. Now, I don't put it in with the broccoli and the kale just because I still have massaging to do, though you certainly could do that. Massaging is in massaging our dressing in. Right. Okay, so now we're going to make a dressing. Now, you can do this in a food processor, which is a bit quicker, or you can do it, or you can do it in a bowl. But I like to use a food processor because then I don't have to chop anything, which is great. The things that I am doing are I'm getting out 2 cloves of garlic and I'm removing the root end of the garlic. Now, if you want to keep dressing in your fridge and have it last for the week, you can double this recipe. 2 cloves of peeled garlic are going to go into my food processor, and I'm going to turn off my audio for just a second so you don't hear this noise. Great. We're also going to add a half cup of tahini. So when you get a container of tahini, it's often has a layer at the bottom that is separated from the like softer, goopier top. So you're going to want to stir it really well. And once it's incorporated, then you can measure out your half cup. Tahini is really thick. It's super thick. It's made from sesames, just ground up sesame and oil. And so you may find that your food processor, depending on how old it is or how well it works, it may have a little bit of trouble processing it, which is why we have the option of adding some water, like up to a fourth cup of water into the dressing. But I like to add that slowly because you don't want to dilute dressing that you don't need to dilute. And by the way, my quinoa came to a boil. So I just lowered it to a simmer, and we're going to set our timer for 15 minutes so we can check on it. Notice it is not, I do not have it covered. Okay, back to our dressing. So I've got tahini, about 1/2 cup, plus 2 cloves of garlic, raw, inside of a food processor. You may mince your garlic first, and then do this in a bowl, adding your tahini. I'm also going to put in a 4th cup of vinegar. So again, apple cider is great. Actually, a dash of balsamic is delicious. Not a whole 4th cup of it, but that's delicious in this dressing. Balsamic and tahini pair really well together. A white vinegar, a rice vinegar, a white wine vinegar also go well. I'm using just an apple cider, which does the trick. So I did 1/4 cup of that apple cider vinegar. And then I'm going to do a teaspoon of maple syrup, honey, or sugar. That's up to you, whatever you want to use. You can measure it or eyeball it. The sweetener is just really nice in this salad. So I did 1 teaspoon of honey. Agave works too, if you'd prefer that. And then we're going to do some lemon juice. So using a lemon squeezer. Usually I can get 2 tablespoons out of a single lemon. We'll see. Sometimes I like to measure it out just for fun to see what we end up having. And I do have measuring. So I'm looking for about 2 tablespoons. There's one. I love having a lemon squeezer. If you don't have a lemon squeezer, a little tip is like using a spoon to sort of break some of the cell walls in the lemon, making it easier to squeeze. So yeah, I'd say just 1/2 of this very juicy lemon gave me 2 tablespoons. That's a win. All right. And now if you want, you can start to pulse or you can finish at everything but the water and see how it goes. So I'm going to start off with 1/2 teaspoon of salt for the dressing. I'm just using regular table salt. Okay, and then you can use pepper to taste. I love pepper, so I'm going to do 1/2 teaspoon. I hope I said 1/2 teaspoon of salt. That's what I meant, not tablespoon. I think I did. Yeah. 1/2 teaspoon of salt, pepper to taste. Go ahead and process that. Now, my dressing is a little bit thick. I can actually show it to you in the camera. So it's not moving at all out of my food processor. That means I probably want to add more water. So it's gone. You can add, up to a 1/4 cup of water. I suggest a little at a time, so I'm doing an 1/8 cup. I'll blend again. That looks pretty good. I'm going to add a tiny bit more. So all in all, I probably did add a full 1/4 cup in there. Use your intuition and taste for adjustments so you know what you like in a salad dressing. You want it creamier, add more tahini. If you want it saltier, obviously add more salt. It's perfect. Now you'll notice tahini has a really bitter, complex flavor. It pairs so well with like the bright craisins or dried cranberries in the salad and the like nutty seeds that you have in there. So that's great. Okay, so now we will be moving on to our next dish while our quinoa still cooks. So just make sure to keep an eye on it. You can stir it. We still have about 10 minutes on the timer while it's under heat. Okay, so for our next dish, we're going to be using tofu. And so quick tricks about tofu is if you're frying it, it works well to have as much of the water removed as possible. There's a couple ways you can do this. I like to freeze my tofu and then squeeze it. Sometimes after you freeze it, it's harder to get it in nice slices. It wants to crumble a bit more, so keep that in mind. You can also take it and put a weight on it, like a plate with a rock on top of it or a plate with a heavy bowl. And for quite a few hours, just let it sit and dry out in your fridge. And you can also just serve it as is, and it's still going to be delicious. You can cut these into, we are going to eventually sort of cube it or tear it, but for now, I'm going to cut it into 1/4 inch slabs, and that's just going to make the frying process a bit easier. And we're going to fry it on both sides for 3 to 5 minutes. So if you're just getting it out of the package, you're going to want to pat it down with a paper towel or a clean dish towel, something like that. And basically, I'm just left with a few slabs of our tofu. You can put about 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil or canola oil, whatever oil you like to cook in. You can measure it out. I just like to coat the bottom of the pan and make sure there's a little extra. I just have the perfect amount here because we are sort of frying it or searing it. We're going to get that heated up to a medium heat, and we're not going to drop in the tofu until it's pretty warm. Right, so quinoa's cooking. Got our tofu cut up. We're going to salt the tofu, and do not over salt in this step. We can always add more salt. I just like to do a light dusting. So I just grab some salt between my fingertips and swirl it around. And then I flip the tofu. And I'm going to do the same thing again, a light bit of salt, get it in my fingertips, swirl it around. And I'm really not even having to re-up the salt as I do that. And if you were needing to pat it dry, paper towels work great. Once we've moved these into the pan, we can line a plate or the cutting board you were using or a different cutting board with some paper towel to drain off excess moisture for when the tofu is finished. I'm going to get that. Make sure to keep checking on that quinoa. It should be starting to fluff up quite a bit. There's many different types of quinoa. I'm using a tricolor quinoa. Doesn't really matter what you use here. And we're just waiting for that oil to heat up. Now we're going to use a small bowl, or you can use a big bowl and transfer everything into it later. It's totally up to you. But we're going to prep our shallots and or onions. So I'm looking for about 3 tablespoons of shallots, and we're going to get these sort of soaking to remove some of the bitterness or pungency of the onion or shallot. Shallots are used a lot in French cooking. And I wasn't able to get my hands on any, but I truly think they're interchangeable with onions, especially nice local grown small onions. So yeah, we only need a few tablespoons. The onion is, or shallot is going to be raw in this dish. And you can use tablespoon to measure. When I'm cutting my onions here, I'm keeping in mind that these are going to be raw, so they're going to, they'll be in vinegar or acid, which is good. But I'm going to cut them really small if I can, because I don't want to get a huge bite of onion. My best to mince the onion, almost not even dice it, but mince it. What I have here is about 2 tablespoons, I'd say, maybe 2.5. And if you look at the amount of tofu you have, you'll see, maybe I don't need any more than what I have. Because this dish is simple. It's tofu, herbs, and shallot or onion. But I think this is plenty for me. Fits on the blade of a knife. I'm gonna pour it in that bowl. Now, folks, it's important that your quinoa is on low or simmer. You don't want it to cook too fast. You don't want to run out of water before had time to fully cook. Clean myself up a little bit here. So I only ended up using about 1 small, really small onion. And shallots are a lot smaller than onions too, so you might not even use the whole thing though. Go back. Check on my quinoa. It's really absorbing the water. There's only a little bit of water left in the pan and 3 minutes and 40 seconds left on my timer, so I'm feeling great about the temperature and how this is going. I might actually do a little bit more onion, I'm a fan. At this point, your pan should be pretty warm, as long as you turned on the right burner, which I did. And so I'm going to go ahead and carefully drop my tofu in. You can use tongs, although I don't necessarily recommend it because tofu is pretty fragile. But just be careful, you're dropping wet things into hot oil. I like to do a little simmer test, so I'll put a little bit in and I'll listen if it's starting to simmer. And it is, so I feel pretty good about that. I'm on medium-high heat, and I'm going to get these going for about 3 to 5 minutes on either side till they're nice golden brown. Make sure your pan is big enough so they can lay flat. Okay, now back to making this sauce, the herb sauce that's going to go on our tofu. So we've minced 3 tablespoons of onion or shallot. We're going to put in just a pinch of salt. Again, pinch of salt. We'll adjust for more salt later. This is just going to help sweat the onions, which is what we want them to do. And we're going to add in some more lemon juice. So you can use the other half of your lemon. You may need 2 because we want about 2 tablespoons again. So that's probably 1 tablespoon there. Cut the little end off so it's easier to press. 2 tablespoons. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can adjust for more acid if desired, always. A full bowl of compost already. Okay. Good time to check on your quinoa. You don't want it sticking to the bottom. If it starts to do that, it means it's run out of water and it's probably good to turn it off. And at this point, I can show this to you. I've got some nice fluffy quinoa. So I think it's good to go. I only have 20 seconds left on my timer, so I'm going to turn that off. Basically, I'm going to cover it up. I'm going to let it sit until we're ready to serve. I'm really starting to see some sizzling on my tofu, but I'm not going to touch it yet. The only reason I would touch it is if my pan tends to stick. And if that's the case, it's sometimes smart to give it just a tiny little push to relieve any of that sticking happening. So I am getting a tiny bit of sticking. And I'm just going to push each piece. That way the oil gets back under it, helps it not stick. We want to keep that beautiful crispy skin. You can also give your tofu sauce a little stir. Perfect. We're going to add a ½ cup of olive oil. You really could use, you can start with a 1/4 cup if you want and see if that's enough sauce for your tofu. So maybe I'll do that. I'm going to start with 1/4 cup. And that's going to go right into the vinegar with the shallots. Give that a stir too. Nice and good. And you can always add another ½ cup of olive oil if you need more sauce, but I think this should be plenty. It's already so good. And the lemon juice, the shallot, and now the olive oil. Okay, next up is the herbs. So as I mentioned, we can use some dry herbs like oregano or thyme up to a teaspoon, depending on how much herb you like. So I'm going to do a teaspoon of dried oregano, which is one of my favorites. You're gonna do some red pepper flakes. This is to taste, for sure, but you can use as much as you'd like or as little as you like or none. It's not totally necessary. I'm doing about a half a teaspoon. Get some nice heat in there. And so this will allow the pepper and the oregano to have a little bit of time to get softer because they're dried spices. You're kind of making a glorified salad dressing that's a little bit thicker. And then we're going to add our fresh herbs. One thing to note, there's two ways to do this. You can make this herby dressing for the tofu in a food processor. Then it would be a smooth green sauce. Or you can leave everything chunky, which is kind of what I prefer for this dish. It's up to you. I just checked the back of my tofu. It has some gold color coming, but it's not quite where I want it. So I'm going to leave it cook a little longer. So herbs, use as much as you like. You can do a half cup, up to a half cup of cilantro, a half cup of parsley, and then some pinches of other fresh herbs here and there. I love throwing in scallions to this dish, chives. That's really nice too. But basically, I'm going to start off with about a half cup of thinly sliced parsley. And it's okay to get the stems in there as long as you slice it thinly. If you're looking for something to do with the bulk of the stems, go ahead and soak them in olive oil or vinegar, and you can have a parsley infused vinegar. That's a bit more than half cup, but that's okay because I love my herbs. One reason why it's nice to have some extra olive oil, because we only put in a fourth cup when you can do a full half cup, is that you can preserve some of this dressing and use it for another dish. I'm just getting it nice and fine here. Drop it right in. I'm going to do the same thing for my cilantro. At some point you might notice, hey, we have more herb than dressing, and that would clue you in to put in a bit more olive oil. You can always adjust these to your tastes and preferences. I happen to be a person who loves acid, loves vinegar, loves lemon. So I could add more lemon, I could add more salt, I could add more spices if I want. But this is a great starting block. So I've got about a half cup of parsley, a half cup of cilantro, and I'm even going to throw in a little bit of dill, not so much though. Just because I have it. Dill is such an ephemeral thing. Okay, and at this point, probably time to flip my tofu. Check it out. Oh yeah, nice, beautiful golden brown color that extends about 1/8 of an inch into the slab of tofu. That's exactly what I want. So I'm flipping each one. A little bit of shaking. Make sure there's no sticking on the pan. And now stir in this beautiful, oh my goodness, the smells are incredible. Wow. No, to try this. And you may want to do a little more olive oil. It's totally up to you. I'm just doing another squirt. And you want this mixture to stick on your tofu, but you don't want too much liquid in there that it's just making a runny dish. All right. That looks incredible. So Once it's thoroughly mixed, you can give it a taste. And adjust your seasoning. You might want to add in a little more salt. Note that there's some salt on our tofu already, so keep that in mind. You can also adjust the salt once you've already spread this sort of marinade sauce on your tofu. All right. So we've got the sauce ready to go. And again, you can blend that if you want like a nice smooth sauce. And now we're just going to get our salad ready to dress. So I'm going to clean up my station a little bit. Herbs. And so massaging kale is a really important aspect that makes it more digestible for us, just more pleasurable mouthfeel to it. And I think it's absolutely necessary when making a fresh kale salad. You can use gloves when you do this. You can use cooking utensils to do it, though I think the best method is just your hands. Although you may, if you have cuts or scrapes or whatever in your hands, it might not be advisable. Right, so got my nice creamy tahini dressing. And I'm just gonna start off a little bit at a time. I don't want to overdress the salad. Now, this is such a recipe that I just love making kale salads because there's a billion ways you can alter it and make it a fresh new salad. I'm gonna rinse my hands. So they're clean. There's a billion ways you can alter the salad and make it fresh and delicious. Sometimes for a more fall-infused flavor, I like to incorporate a roasted beet or a roasted squash, and I pour them on the salad when they're hot. Or some like fresh little matchstick apple slices. You could use raw onion if you want raw onion, though I think there's plenty of that in this dish already with the tofu. It's just such a yummy, yummy, healthy way to eat. Roasted Brussels sprouts would go really well on this. Like, good way to pack in your veg. All right, so I'm just getting that nice and massaged in there. I used about a half cup of dressing for the amount of salad I had, and I've got plenty left over, so I can make this again if I'd like. And you'll notice how much the kale really loses volume. Really, a minute or two of massaging should be all you need. I'm gonna rinse my hands now. Now, let's do a quick check on our tofu here. I think it could still use a little bit of time. Get the thing a little better at getting under it. Wow, it's looking so good. I'm just going to show you once I get a peek at all these and make sure they're done, what my colored, the browning of the tofu looks like, what I want it to look like. Some pieces might finish earlier than others, especially the ones in the middle of your pan. That is what we want to see. Beautiful. So I'm going to set those to remove excess oil. And cool for a moment before we tear or cut them. Turn off your heat. I ended up with about 6 like fillets. Yay. Now you can add the quinoa. 1/3 cup is all you need. And we can also add our pumpkin seeds and our craisins. I need a little 1/3 cup measuring stick, or you can just do it with a 1/4 cup, so I put a little extra. You can wait for the quinoa to cool, or I honestly like how the heat wilts the salad. Give it a good stir. And as I mentioned before, I highly suggest using some parsley or cilantro or fresh herbs. And once that quinoa cools, making a little lemon vinaigrette with some olive oil and garlic and throwing in some fresh herbs, maybe some diced bell pepper or cucumber. You can make a tabbouleh of sorts or some kind of side salad with all that leftover quinoa. Now you can choose how much quinoa, how much grain you'd like to be put into the dish. I think what I have here is a perfect amount. Again, you can use dried cherries. You can use different nuts. Experiment with roasted veggies. I'm gonna give it a taste just to see if I want to add anything. So good. You might want to add more dressing if you like a highly dressed salad. I'm gonna do some plating here. Now we're going to use one more bowl, a decent sized bowl, so that you can mix your tofu with the sauce. Hopefully my tofu's had a minute to cool. All of my burners are off. You're going to want to use your knife, and the one that had herbs on it is just fine. What I like to do is stack my little fried tofus, or pan seared. I cut them, let me see that you can see this. I cut them in half. And then I like to make little rough cubes here. You can also just rip them with your hands if you prefer. This isn't the best knife for this, but it's working fine. And you might get some extra oil come out once you've split them. So sometimes I like to stick them back on a paper towel and do a little squeeze. Right? Put those in your bowl. Time to mix in your sauce. You can do the whole thing or save some for later, whatever you prefer. I'll start with just this and see where we're at. My goodness, that smells so good. I'm gonna cook the whole thing. It's a great high protein, high nutrient density, fairly easy, under 1 hour meal. And it's visually stunning. All these bright colors and greens, circles. Oh my goodness. That looks great. Okay, I'm gonna give it a try. Adjust for salt. I'm just doing a little pinch. Honestly, it doesn't need much. Wow, that is yummy. So fresh tasting. Really reminds me of Vietnamese dishes that I've had. And then you can plate your tofu. Very healthy, extremely healthy, but extremely delicious meal. And if you want, you could even serve it with some quinoa with a little pat of butter or something like that. Voila. Herby marinated seared tofu, a kale tahini salad with quinoa, broccoli, craisins, and pepita seeds. All right, folks. Well, it was so nice having you in class tonight. If you have any questions, you can always email us. My email is brooke@justroots.org if you'd like to get a copy of the recipe or you didn't sign up for a kit. All right, happy cooking, everybody. Please do fill out those feedback forms that we send out and let us know if there's any recipes you're craving that we can make for class. Take care.